This episode has been brought to you by Schedulicity.
And also by the Pelvic Health Professionals membership site. This is where healthcare professionals from all modalities, yoga teachers to PTs to movement educators to doctors, this is where they come together and collaborate and learn about all things pelvic health. In there, we have an up-to-date library of resources, an online private group, monthly Q&A calls, and access to amazing pelvic health experts from around the world. What is so cool about this Connected Yoga Teachers is that MJ Forget, who you are going to hear from today, is our October guest expert in the Pelvic Health Professionals membership site. To find out more, visit pelvichealthprofessionals.com. If you are listening in real time, today is the day that the doors open. So the doors are going to be open for a short amount of time. You are welcome to come on over to pelvichealthprofessionals.com, take a look around, and sign up today. I have to tell you that this membership site grew into something beyond my expectations. Thank you to a couple of very dear friends. So I want to say a huge thank you to Barb, Amanda, and Shelley. If you are listening, you know exactly who you are, and you helped me to see a bigger vision with this. You helped me to see this way that not only yoga teachers, but other healthcare professionals who are interested in and wanting to learn more and wanting to share what they already know about pelvic health can come together. If you have any questions about this at all, there are two really quick ways to reach out to me and get my attention. One is through the voicemail button on our Connected Yoga Teacher homepage. You can find that right on the right-hand side. And the other is to reach out to me through my Instagram account. It's Shannon Crow Yoga. And send me an Instagram DM using text or voice, and I will reply back to you as soon as I'm in there. So welcome everyone to episode 129 of the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow, a mother of three, a yoga teacher, and a trainer and consultant who works for yoga teachers. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm getting over a cold. If you listened to the last episode I recorded for you, that's when I was starting to get it. And it's going away. Thank you for your patience as I kind of croak through this intro for you. This podcast was created for you, dear yoga teacher, so that you can connect to information and inspiration every single week and feel supported as you navigate what it's like to be an entrepreneur, a business owner, and a yoga teacher. I don't know if you can tell, but I am super excited to be able to share one of my favorite topics today, pelvic health. A few episodes ago in episode 121, I talked about yoga for pelvic health, my own experience, and why it's become such a passion for me. And today, I am excited that Marie-Josée Forget, I hope I'm saying this right, Marie-Josée also goes by MJ, and so I will probably refer to her as MJ from now on. MJ is a fellow Canadian and a pelvic health physiotherapist, and she is going to help us understand a bit more about the anatomy and crucial role that the pelvic floor plays in our body. And this place in our body often gets very little attention until something goes wrong. So today, let's dive in and learn about the pelvic floor, learn how it functions, learn what makes up the pelvic floor. And in case you feel like you need to take a lot of notes, there are show notes ready for you at theconnectedyogateacher.com/129. There you can find all of the links that we talk about, along with clickable timestamps so that you can easily go back and refer to a specific topic in each and every episode. Remember how I was just talking about Amanda, who I needed to give a thank you to? I need to thank Amanda for another reason today. I was just scrolling through our reviews and saw that Amanda McKinney, who is a marketing coach for yoga teachers and has become a business bestie of mine, Amanda left us a review, and so I am thrilled to read it. Amanda says, the Facebook group, the podcast, Shannon overall is amazing. She has so much knowledge and experience as a yoga teacher, and she shares it all. If you have a question about teaching yoga or running a yoga business, she's your person. I highly recommend everything Shannon creates. Well, thank you, Amanda. This means so much, and your friendship means a lot. Your support means a lot. And just your offerings out into the world for yoga teachers are an amazing resource. I have pushed and pushed friends for Amanda to start a podcast so that I could take her words with me in the car. And guess what? She's doing that. So I'm going to do everything in my power to put a link to her podcast in this episode. It's not even out there yet. So the magic of our show notes writer, Crunch, and our team will find that when it's ready for you, and go and have a listen if you've ever had any questions about how to market your yoga. I have a question for you now. Have you left us a review yet? It is really the best gift of thank you that you can offer a podcaster. It is a great way also to have a little moment of fame where I talk about you on the podcast. Before we meet MJ, let's hear our hot tip of the week from the team at Schedulicity.
Hey Connected Yoga teachers, this is Anna with the Schedulicity Hot Tip of the Week. Schedulicity is pleased to present improvements to our class booking feature. We worked with yoga businesses to find out what they really needed to make their business more successful and less stressful. Together, we developed group booking, online waivers, waitlists, and client alerts to help you manage the needs of your students and grow as a business. If you've been wondering how an online scheduler can help you specifically as a business, we'd love to tell you more. Email us anytime at support@schedulicity.com or visit schedulicity.com for more information and a chat with one of our support rockstars.
Thank you so much, Team Schedulicity, for all that you do to make my life easier. Anything to do with payments, scheduling, when can you book with me is all thank you to Schedulicity. Marie-Josée Forget is a pelvic health physiotherapist, as I said, with 18 years of clinical experience. She graduated from the University of Ottawa in 1995 and began pursuing her postgraduate series in pelvic health in Canada and the US in 1997. In 2011, she joined the teaching company Pelvic Health Solutions, where she currently teaches the non-internal introductory pelvic floor courses and the level 1, 2, and 4 courses. MJ has also developed a hand-drawn female and male pelvic floor model that is being used as a teaching tool. And let me tell you, I love this tool. I will make sure to link to it in our show notes. I have a male and female pelvic floor model from MJ, and I pull it out all the time. My kids don't really appreciate it as much as I do, but that is because they're teenagers and early 20s. But everyone else that gets to see what does the pelvic floor look like loves this pelvic floor model. Apart from MJ's work as an instructor and public speaker on the topic of pelvic health, MJ runs a private physiotherapy practice in North Bay, Ontario, and operates a satellite clinic in New Liskeard. Her practice consists of treating both men and women who suffer from urinary incontinence, fecal incontinence, overactive bladder, constipation, pelvic organ prolapse, post-prostatectomy incontinence, and pelvic pain syndromes. Now let's dive in and get straight to learning more about the pelvic floor and how this information can not only help you, but also your yoga students. Welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, Marie-Josée. It is amazing to have you here today.
Hi, it's great to be here.
So tell our listeners, what is the work that you do and who do you do it for?
Now, I own a practice here in North Bay in Northern Ontario, and I've been a pelvic health physio since 1997. So I've been doing this for, 20 odd years. My clientele is men, women, and children who have pelvic floor dysfunctions. So it could be incontinence, it could be for women, prolapse issues, it could be my pregnant women with pelvic girdle pain, my postpartum mums. men who have had incontinence because of prostate cancer, and children who have bedwetting issues and constipation issues. So that's kind of, the umbrella of pelvic health and what I do. So a little bit of everything in my practice, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thank you so much for the work that you do. And I think I first got connected with just looking up who you are and what you do because a pelvic floor physio in our area, Jessica,
Yes.
she brought one of your models along with her. And I was like, who is this? And it took a little bit of like detective work to find out. But you have the most amazing pelvic floor model that is, I'm able to travel with it. Let's just say that, because I just went to Bermuda to teach and I couldn't take all of like my other two pelvic models. And so I'm super appreciative that I can just slip this in a binder or a book or, and to be able to, it's hard to describe through a podcast, but basically, do you want to talk about what it's like?
Yeah, it's funny because this whole model thing, it's an accidental business because it started off because I teach with Pelvic Health Solutions, and we were trying to figure out ways to have our therapists learn pelvic floor anatomy because it's so hard to visualize the pelvic floor. Like it really is difficult because it's not a muscle you can see, it's inside your body. And what happened is back in university, I drew a lot of my anatomy because I'm a very visual learner. And so for me, I drew a lot. And when I started in pelvic health, there really wasn't a lot available to kind of help really learn the anatomy. And so I drew my own images. And so when I showed that to my colleagues, they said, okay, we need to use this in the classroom. And with the help of my husband, we kind of figured out a way to show the different layers of the pelvic floor and have it in such a way that you can either learn the anatomy yourself or show your clients, or for physios to show their patients where these muscles are located and why we do the treatments that we do. And it kind of ballooned from there. So it's like a laminated model, and there's a layer that I can't draw on these models. There's 3 layers of the pelvic floor. But what I have on my model is the most superficial layer of the pelvic floor and the deepest layer of the pelvic floor, which are the ones when we are trying to elicit a pelvic floor contraction or relaxation, or the main muscles that we're targeting. So it's my anatomy images that are hand-drawn and now laminated, and you can kind of fold it with Velcro. So it's kind of like a 3D model, like the ones we typically see in the physio clinics, the big plastic models. So yeah, so that's my model. And it is hard to kind of explain on an audio, but it's been very handy.
Yeah, for sure. I love the little Velcro tabs that make it, create this pelvic shape. And
yeah,
so
and
that you can see how the muscles are in
Yeah,
it.
because patients and clients really appreciate it because they hear about this muscle, but they have no idea where it is. They also don't understand how significantly it's big. It's a lot bigger. And I tried to make the model, Ashley, almost kind of the same size. So the female model is approximately kind of the size you would see on women, and the male model as well. So I tried to make it as anatomically correct in size as well. And so people can really appreciate, okay, I have a whole bunch of muscles down there. I had no idea. And they're actually a lot more significant than I thought them to be. Again, because we can't see it. We can't necessarily always feel it. So we don't get a lot of feedback, especially if women and men are not well connected to their pelvic floor, if they really can't tell what they're doing, if they're doing a pelvic floor contraction properly or not.
Amazing. So tell us, if we go right back to the beginning and we want to describe what is the pelvic floor, where is it, and what it does. Do you want to start there for us?
Yeah, we can start there. So our pelvic floor muscles are, if we want to kind of sit tall in our chairs, the best thing I always tell my patients, the best thing to kind of feel is your 2 sit bones, right? You've got your 2 sit bones at the bottom of your pelvis, and you've got your pubic bone in the front of your pelvis, and then you've got your tailbone at the back of your pelvis. So your pelvic floor basically runs from your pubic bone in the front, and it comes down and attaches to your sit bones in the middle, and then it comes back and attaches to your tailbone at the back. So it's pretty big because we have this image of a hammock, but it's not quite a hammock, actually. The pelvic floor is like 2 triangles, right? There's a triangle at the front and a triangle at the back. So when we sit tall, front pubic bone, down to your sit bones, and up to the back to your tailbone. And it has many jobs to do. So the pelvic floor is quite important. And we know as women, because we definitely see this on social media, we do talk a lot about incontinence. The pelvic floor is designed to tighten when we cough, sneeze, laugh, or do a quick movement. It's designed to tighten, to close around the urethra. And that's to prevent us from having any leakage issues. And it's also designed to tighten to give you time to get to the bathroom on time. So if you have an urge to go to the bathroom, either for your bladder or for your bowel, you need to walk to the bathroom. So your pelvic floor is designed to close off all of your openings, so there's sphincters, to get you to the bathroom on time. So coughing, sneezing, laughing, pressure on the bladder, it tightens up, closes off our urethra and also our anal canal so we don't lose bowel control. And we hang on to that tension to get to the bathroom on time so we don't lose bladder control on the way. It's also the muscle we use for support, and that's important for women. When we visualize the pelvic floor, think of it like a shelf. It holds up our bladder, our vagina, our uterus, and our rectum, women and men. And that's really important because when women have children, depending on their birth experience and how long they labored and whatnot, our pelvic floor softens during pregnancy and it softens with labor and delivery. And so what can happen with some women is they'll start to feel like there's pressure in their perineum. They start to feel, or they may see a bump in their vagina. We call that a prolapse. So if you kind of visualize your pelvic floor like a shelf that's just kind of softened up a little bit because of pregnancy and delivery, then the organs feel like they're losing some support, okay? And so it's important for supporting our pelvic organs. It is also used for sexual function, so that's really important because for both men and women, these are the muscles that will contract to allow us to have an orgasm. So for women, it contracts to keep blood in our clitoris. For men, it contracts to keep blood in their penis. And so that's really important for sexual function. And then they relax post-orgasm as well. So very, very good, very important for that. In the world of sports and fitness and everything, we know that it's part of your core. So it works with your diaphragm. So when you inhale, your pelvic floor lengthens eccentrically. So it's a contraction, but it's an eccentric contraction. And when you exhale, it concentrically. So it lifts up with the diaphragm. So it's important when we're talking about the breath. It's important when we're talking about exercise. So it does that. And then it has to relax. It has to relax to allow you to void. So when you sit on the toilet, it needs to lengthen and open to initiate voiding. And it needs to do that to have bowel movement. And it needs to do all of that to not cause us any discomfort or any difficulties with emptying our bladder or having a bowel movement. So it's a really important muscle because it does all of that. And one of the things that I'm sure some of your speakers have spoken to before, it is a muscle that guards. I call it like a protective muscle. So if you have like a bladder infection or a yeast infection, it will tighten up. It guards, it protects. But if you have, let's say you have pain with intercourse, let's say you're postmenopausal and you've had some vaginal dryness, you have intercourse, it hurts, your pelvic floor will guard and protect, right? Because it's your body's way of saying something's not okay down there, so let's have a look. And that guarding is really important, but the problem with that guarding is it can lead to chronic pelvic pain. So women who'll say, I've had ongoing pain with intercourse for years and years. I have bladder pain. I have endometriosis. What we notice is there's a lot of guarding and tensioning in that pelvic floor. And what we have to do with those patients is we have to learn to teach them to let go and soften that pelvic floor. So that's what the pelvic floor does. It's really quite a spectacular muscle. And when people understand what it does, it makes sense to them in terms of explaining a lot of their symptoms, right? Because a lot of people will say, well, why is it that I have bladder issues and it hurts to have sex and I have, a lot of these symptoms, but they're all related because it's all because of what's happening in the tone and tension of that pelvic floor.
When you talk about this guarding that we do, and you talked about a couple of physical things that could lead to that, what about also emotionally? Do we guard with the pelvic floor under stress?
We do, and that's been actually studied. There has been studies done where they've done EMG testing of the pelvic floor, and in stress and anxiety and in past trauma. I mean, we could do a whole show on trauma, right? Past emotional trauma, childhood trauma. We know that there is a lot of tension in the pelvic floor, a lot of that guarding. And so that's really important. And again, we can't ignore stress, anxiety, depression, and past trauma when we're treating our patients who have pelvic floor dysfunctions, because it really does. I would say your body wants to hang on to your stress somewhere. Some people it's their jaw, some people it's headaches, and some people it's their pelvic floor. And so, yeah, it does all of that in the face of stress, in the face of anxiety, and in the face of trauma, of course.
Right. So what I'm hearing you say is that there are so many functions that we need to be able to do every single day, like going to the bathroom and not going to the bathroom when we don't want to. You know, our sexuality is affected by this, our pain, and how we are able to move with our core and this, all movements that we do. So it's a little bit fascinating to me that this, in my experience, learning anatomy in college and then learning anatomy in yoga, the pelvic floor really got skipped over so often.
And I'll tell you, I graduated from university in 95 as a physio, where we had anatomy labs, and I can't tell you if I was taught the pelvic floor at all. And that's really astounding. And I would say, you know, it's probably better now at the university level, but I would say, you know, it's still lacking. You know, it's still a part of body that we kind of ignore. And it's not until you start actually taking courses in pelvic health or doing yoga courses that we start to talk about it because of its importance. But no, it was the same for me, which is why I had to draw these pictures, because I felt like I just didn't have enough knowledge as a physio about the pelvic floor anatomy.
That's amazing. I do think that we're talking about it a lot more now. I hear yoga teachers talking about it. And I also hear some blanket statements happening about the pelvic floor. Like, can you touch on a little bit in terms of, like, what I would love our yoga teachers to hear, because you had said it when you described how the pelvic floor gives way for pregnancy and birth. And I think we have this assumption in society, maybe as women, that our pelvic floors are weak as we age, as we have children. So do you want to talk about how the muscle actually is in the people that you're working with and with your knowledge?
Yeah, when I started in my career, everything we were taught, even as pelvic health physios going back 20 years, it was all about strengthen, 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 Kegel, Kegel, Kegel. And what was happening, and this is my personal experience, what was happening with my patients is I was noticing with time that some people got really good and got better really quickly. And I had a lot of patients that got worse. And I remember thinking, what in the world am I doing wrong? I'm doing everything I've been taught. And it wasn't until I started taking courses where we started talking about tension in the pelvic floor that I had that aha moment of, okay, so there's two states of the pelvic floor. You can be someone that has weakness, but you might be somebody that has a lot of tension in their pelvic floor. And it can get really confusing because there's some intermingling of symptoms. When you have tension in your pelvic floor, you have an underlying weakness because your muscle's not very efficient. So you can have tension in your pelvic floor and have incontinence, but you also have pain with intercourse. You also may have tailbone pain. You may have urgency and frequency. So a muscle that's too weak can cause incontinence, but a muscle that's too tight also can cause incontinence. So it gets confusing. And the benefit of doing internal exam as pelvic health physios is we can evaluate what's happening to the pelvic floor. Now, we can ask questions as well. And I always ask my patients, let's talk through your symptoms. And whenever somebody says to me, I have incontinence, but it also hurts to have sex. I have back pain. I have hip pain. I have urgency. I have frequency. My thinking is we're probably dealing with tension in the pelvic floor. If somebody's coming in to see me and it really is just incontinence, they're having intercourse, they're fine, they have no back pain, no hip pain, no sexual discomfort, then chances are they're probably just having some weakness. But it has to be confirmed via an internal exam. That's really the gold standard of knowing what's happening. And I've been surprised at people that maybe I thought would have weak pelvic floor actually do have underlying. And that can happen to postpartum moms. It can happen at any time, at any reasons. a lot of our athletes, a lot of our teenagers that are incontinent. There are teenagers who are incontinent, a lot of our high impact athletes. And the thinking is they have a lot more tension in their pelvic floor than weakness. I mean, they've never had babies, right? They're 16, 17. If we think gymnasts, who are landing a lot, the thinking is they probably have more tension in their system than they actually have in terms of pure weakness. So yeah, it can get really tricky. And so we have to really make sure that we work together as a team, whether you're a yoga instructor or a Pilates instructor. If your client is telling you when they're doing, let's say, a Kegel exercise, let's say they're being cued to tighten their pelvic floor. If they're telling you that hurts or it's uncomfortable, then that's not okay. That might be a little inkling to you as the instructor that there may be tension in that pelvic floor. And then I would send them off to a physiotherapist or anybody in your area who does internal pelvic floor evaluations. Because that's a telltale sign. A lot of women who have tension, have discomfort, do not like doing a pelvic floor contraction. It doesn't sit well with them. It doesn't feel good. Or they'll say, I can't feel it. I can't tell that I'm squeezing. They get frustrated. You might see them doing a lot of breath holding techniques, a lot of use of their accessory muscles, and they're uncomfortable. And that's where, like I said, working as a team with a pelvic floor physio in your area is really great because you can send them off for an evaluation and then you'll know that there's tension. And in the yoga world, it works out really well because I find that a lot of what you do in yoga, because of the aspect of breathing, really helps with the letting go of tension. And I think a true yoga practice, and I'm a yoga I don't teach yoga, I do yoga. So my sense is there's a lot more focus on letting go of tension overall in the body via the breathing. And that's the kind of yoga style that I find really works well for our patients who have a lot of tension. And it moves with your breath. So as a yoga instructor, you don't necessarily have to always cue tightening, just cue breathing. As long as they're doing a nice diaphragmatic breath, there's movement of their pelvic floor. So if you're a yoga instructor and you're not sure if your patient has just a weak pelvic floor or a tight pelvic floor, don't get stressed out about that. Maybe just don't cue a tightening of the pelvic floor, but just focus on the breath. Just focus on getting them to get that best diaphragmatic movement because the pelvic floor moves with the diaphragm. Then have them evaluated by a pelvic floor physio, and then you'll get more feedback. And then maybe with those clients, you can cue a little bit more of a contraction if they're just weak, or maybe then you'll need to focus on lengthening and opening with other patients or other clients. Yeah. Does that make sense?
That makes total sense. And that's so liberating, I think, to yoga teachers that we don't need to know. We can ask them or tell them, the best way to know what's going on with your pelvic floor is to go see a pelvic floor physio. They will tell you. Personally, as a yoga teacher, I've let go of cueing pelvic floor engagement. I sometimes like to bring out the pelvic floor model and talk about the different ways that the muscles can work. I do that work more so with yoga teachers, and I really encourage them. Please go see a pelvic floor physio. You will learn so much about your pelvic floor in such a short time, whether there's an internal exam or not. So can we talk a little moment about, because that's another question I get all the time. What is it like to have a pelvic floor physio do an internal exam?
Now, an internal exam always brings up a lot of stress and anxiety and in men too. And so understandably, because our reference points is pap exams for women, for men, it's rectal exams. And so our image in our mind of an internal is not always a pleasant one, right? Women will think speculum exam. And women who have pain, especially, have a little bit more, concerns when it comes to an internal because they're sore to begin with. So when we do a pelvic exam, I think it's important to know that if I have somebody in front of me who's in tremendous amount of discomfort and pain and been in pain for a long time, I may not even do an exam that first day because that might be too hard for them. And so that's really important for people to know is that you may have a pelvic exam if it's appropriate. And appropriate means if I find that my patient in front of me is stressed and anxious and worried and in a lot of discomfort, maybe we touch on the outside, but we don't touch on the inside. And we have to build trust. We have to develop a therapeutic alliance with our patient and really listen to their story to kind of get a sense of what's been happening in their lives. And sometimes that's visit number one. Sometimes there's not even an internal. Because what we don't want to do as physios, and this is really important, is I'm not going to do an internal exam if it's going to cause you distress and cause you pain. Because you already have had pain for a long, long time. And that would really break down the therapeutic alliance. And these people have had pain and they've had painful paths. So that's really important to kind of really understand that we don't necessarily do an internal under some circumstances if it's going to cause distress, if it's going to cause pain, and then that may take a few sessions before we can even evaluate internally the pelvic floor, and that's perfectly okay. So that's in our patients that have a little bit more persistent pain, a bit more a history of pelvic pain. Now, if you're coming to see me and you've got no pain and you're just somebody who's got incontinence and you consent to a pelvic exam, we do not use stirrups. And we do not use a speculum. So what we do is we observe on the outside the vulva, the perineum, and then we'll ask you to cough. We're going to ask you to squeeze to see if we can see a contraction of the pelvic floor. And then we go in with our fingers. So we start with one finger only to really make sure that our patients are very comfortable. And then we go in, and our job is to palpate the pelvic floor. So for me to determine whether you have a weak pelvic floor or tension in your pelvic floor, I have to palpate, right? So if you came to see me with shoulder pain, I'd put my hands on your shoulder and I would palpate to see kind of where you're holding tension. It's the same thing with the pelvic floor. It's a muscle. And so I'm going to palpate the muscles. And if you feel pressure, that's normal. But if you say to me, that's uncomfortable, that's pinchy, that feels like a bruise, or that reproduces some of my discomfort, then we know that there's tension in that pelvic floor. So for women who have incontinence, we assess that tone, and then we look at strength only if they don't have tension. So if you're just a weak pelvic floor, then we're going to look at how well are you able to engage your pelvic floor. So I want to see, if I ask you to squeeze, how would you do that? So I don't cue my men and my women. I'm like, show me what you think a Kegel is, which is always really interesting because people do all sorts of things.
Right.
And then I observe what they do. And then based on that, I evaluate their strength. And then I teach them how to engage their pelvic floor properly. At that point in time, women who have a prolapse, we're looking to see if there's a prolapse, if their bladder is tipping back or their rectum is tipping forward. So we look at all of that on that first evaluation. And the goal is to send our patients home that day with a bit of exercises if they're weak, to learn to engage their pelvic floor. But if they have tension in their pelvic floor, then we're sending them home with exercise to help lengthen and soften the pelvic floor based on our evaluation. Does that help?
That's amazing. Yeah, that's very helpful. And I know that from my first visit with my own pelvic floor physiotherapist, shout out to Janice Taylor, who you probably know.
I do. Yeah, she's great.
Pelvic floor physios have a really tight-knit community. You're kind of like our yoga teachers, you get to know different professionals in your same area. So with Janice, I know that we developed this real relationship, like you said, and I went just because I was referring so many people. I just thought, I better know what I'm talking about. And what was fascinating to me is that with that internal, Janice was like, do you feel this muscle right here? And she just did a gentle release while she was chatting away to me. And I couldn't believe, I have been trying to get into that muscle with yoga for so long, and I couldn't, and I didn't realize it was coming from my pelvic floor. So it's fascinating to me how the body works. And I think it should be like going to your dentist,
Well, it's interesting. I just had, and tides are changing, right? I mean, if I compare my practice now to 20 odd years ago, I just had this week a lovely postpartum mom, 7 weeks. And whenever anybody comes in, I said, okay, well, who recommended you come see me? And she says, oh no, I decided by myself because I want to just make sure my pelvic floor is okay because I'm a very high-end athlete. I'm a marathoner. I like to lift weights, and I want to make sure that I'm good to go. And I thought, oh, how lovely is that? How great is it that we are getting now to the point where women are recognizing the importance of having a good evaluation and are seeking the care themselves, not asking until they have problems, not necessarily going to their doctors or nurse practitioners, but just kind of doing it on their own. So tides are changing. And I find that really positive in terms of pelvic health, that women are empowered to do that. And I think social media has been really great for that in terms of sharing the information and also demystifying the talking about bladder, bowel, and sexual function. I think that's changed a lot now. I find my women and my men are more likely to chat with their friends and chat with their girlfriends when they go, to coffee or going to play cards. People talk about this a bit more and are more open to talking about even about sexual function, that it's not okay for things to hurt down there. It's not okay for sex to be painful. It's not okay if putting a tampon in hurts, right? And so I'm definitely seeing a change that way. And that's very encouraging. And sometimes when those women come in, I just need a couple of visits. It's just checking to see the function of their pelvic floor and then encouraging them to say, yeah, you're good. Go back to exercise. Yeah, you're good. Go back to yoga. Or look, you've got a little bit of loss of endurance. Let's just kind of fine tune that pelvic floor. You'll be good to go. And I think we need to also reduce a lot of fears around. There's a lot of misconceptions around bladder functions, bowel functions, sexual function there. And our job as pelvic floor physios is to demystify a lot of that, right? Things like patients will say, I have a small bladder, right? Well, small bladders don't exist, right?
Thank goodness.
My bladder's falling out. Well, nothing will ever fall out of your body, right? Your everything's well contained. It feels like it's going to fall out, but it's not going to fall out. And people do often think that. And so our job is to reduce those fears and to say, no, you're okay. Yes, you're feeling a bit of a bulge in your vagina and this is why it's happening, but it's not going to fall out of your body. You're not going to pick it up off the floor. That doesn't happen. Right. And so then women feel very empowered. And then because women will restrict, they're going to restrict social activities. They stop going out with friends. They stop exercising. And that's detrimental to their health and to their mental well-being because of their bladder and bowel. And we want women and men to go out and exercise and to be part of a community, to go to yoga, and socialize. And so we can't let them cocoon themselves at home because they're worried about not getting to the bathroom on time or finding a bathroom on time. So tides are changing, but we still have some work to do for sure in terms of educating, which is why podcasts are so great.
Yeah. I know. I'm excited that people can definitely, post your questions in the comments of our show notes page and also get in touch with either one of us through email. And you're right. On social media, we are starting to talk about it a little bit more. Let's get into the anatomy of the pelvic floor because I feel like when I was first introduced to the pelvic floor, I had that idea of the hammock. We often hear it described as that. And I forget who it was that said, if you think about throwing a bowling ball into a hammock, what do you think of versus a trampoline? Or you talked about it as a shelf. But I had this idea that it's just like this layer of muscle. So do you want to tell us what it actually is like? It's not just one.
No, there's actually layers of your pelvic floor. And again, you can't see this muscle, and then those are things you can't feel, but there's layers. So if you think of, if we could talk about kind of the different layers of the pelvic floor, the layer that's most on the outside of your body, we'll call it the first layer, that contains a lot of little muscles that are mostly used for sexual function. So on the pelvic model you have in front of you, when you turn it around like this. I know nobody's going to be able to see that. So that's your first layer. So it's the most on the outside. So if you were touching your labias, or if a man was touching underneath their testes, there's some softness down there. That's the first layer of your pelvic floor. It's mostly muscles for sexual function. So the muscles that are used to kind of help us have an orgasm and keep blood in our clitoris and blood in our penis. Now, after that, a little bit further inside of your body is the second layer of your pelvic floor. And that layer has your sphincters. And your sphincters are your muscles that help close your urethra and close your anal canal. And they are your voluntary. So you are able to tighten that, when you don't want to leak urine. So that's the second layer. Now, on my pelvic model, there's no second layer. So that's because it's a kind of sandwiched layer between layer 1 and layer 3. So layer 2 is your sphincters. Further in is your layer 3. And that's the meat and potatoes of your pelvic floor. So when we're talking about Kegel exercises, that third layer is really what we're tightening when we're doing a Kegel exercise. And that muscle, when we look in the literature, it's often called the levator ani muscle or the pelvic diaphragm. So that's the second layer on my pelvic model right there. And so those are the muscles that They're called the liveter ani because they're the lifter of the anus. So when you look at my pelvic models, you can see that the muscles go from the pubic bone in the front, but they come and attach to the tailbone at the back. And they loop around. Think of it like big slings of muscles. So they go from one side of your pubic bone, they go around your vagina, around your rectum, attached to your tailbone at the back, and then loop around the other side. And so when they tighten, they compress forward towards your pubic bone to compress and close all of your openings.
Oh,
So
that's fascinating.
think of it like big slings around. So when you're actively doing a Kegel, a big pelvic floor contraction, you are compressing, you're lifting and compressing the anus kind of forward. That's what they call the lever ani, the lifter of the anus. Now it comes up to the sides, which is really interesting. So it's like you can almost visualize like a bowl-shaped muscle. Front to back, those are your slings. Now it comes up to the sides, and that actually attaches to two hip muscles. And those muscles are called the obturator internus muscles. And so your pelvic floor muscles actually have some communication via fascia, which is connective tissue, to your obturator internus. So that's why I remember when I first started treating patients, I would, they'd come to see me for incontinence, and I would work on their pelvic floor, and they'd say things to me like, my hip's been feeling better since you've been doing that. And I kept thinking, why is that happening? But that's because there is communication between the pelvic floor and the obturator internus. And so that's the side walls of your pelvic floor.
Okay.
So that's probably kind of the best way to kind of visualize your pelvic floor. Front to back is the slings. Side pelvic floor connects to the obturator muscle via some connective tissue and some fascia.
So looking at and I'll make sure that we have an image in our show notes. You have 3 different colors in your pelvic floor model. Is that for any reason, or is it just so that we can see the different?
It's just to see the difference. Yeah. Okay. So when our therapists are taking our courses, what they're learning with these models is they're learning to locate and palpate the different parts of the muscle. So it's one muscle, but what we do in anatomy, just to make life so much more complicated, is subdivide muscles into other little muscles. And so physios and physicians and nurse practitioners and midwives, it's important to kind of get an idea of what muscle am I on. And so that's why there's different colors on it and there's different names, which is always the hardest part for anybody to learn when they're learning anatomy of the pelvic floor. And this is the reason why I drew them, because it took me a long time to really say, okay, I'm on this muscle. This is where it's located. This is where it attaches. This is where it ends. And so that's why there's different colors on the pelvic model.
Okay. And so I also see that the obturator internus is on the very outside of this. And are you saying that's not actually pelvic floor muscles, or?
No, it's part, that third layer includes the obturator and also the piriformis.
Yeah.
So if you look on the pelvic model, so that's still considered part of that third layer. So the third layer, you can think of it as levator ani, which is the pelvic floor, obturator internus, and piriformis at the back.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the piriformis can get palpated. That's mostly via a rectal exam, but it can be palpated internally as well. But it's kind of your deepest, it's the furthest back of the wall of your pelvic floor at the back of your pelvis. And so it's interesting because I'll often tell people, I have a lot of physios who send me their patients with chronic low back pain and hip pain. And when we talk about where these muscles attach posterior to the sacrum, and I say, if you're holding a lot of tension in your pelvic floor, that could be contributing to some of your back pain and your hip pain because it's attached to your spine. It's also attached to 2 of these hip muscles. So you may be having a lot of lingering hip pain and back pain because your pelvic floor is also tense. So again, for your yoga instructors, when women and men are presenting with a lot of back pain and hip pain, let's not assume that their pelvic floor is weak. They actually could have tension in their pelvic floor as well. And we have actually a study that talks about that. I was part of a study with McMaster University where I was doing the evaluations, like the internal. So these were people presenting with back pain and hip pain. They consented to have a vaginal and a rectal exam. And we were evaluating the tension of their pelvic floor and reproduction of pain. So were they weak or were they tight? And this is women only, of the women who had a complaint of pelvic floor problems, so that could have been incontinence, constipation, whatever, predominantly they were tight. Because the
Right.
assumption, so the assumption for years, and I'm certainly part of that. I mean, I grew up with like core, strength and strength and strength, and and anybody has low back pain was given core,
Yes.
and I remember women saying to me, "I hate doing core. I don't like it. It's not comfortable," and trying to kind of sort that out in my brain. But now, when with studies like we've done, well, that makes sense because if you have back pain and hip pain, and you have too much tension in your system, and you're doing what we consider as like core strengthening, you're creating more tension. And
Right.
thus you may be causing more back pain and more hip pain versus letting go of tension and softening that area.
Right.
So a lot of shift in thinking and how we do things in physio as it relates to low back pain and hip pain.
That's amazing. I was recently working with someone who was seeing a pelvic floor physio and then coming to see me for yoga. And her main complaint was low back pain and hip pain. And it was so fascinating because we went to do certain movements, and it was like the pelvic floor was trying to do the movement. And these were movements that I was assuming would be more glutes doing the movement, more not the pelvic floor.
Yeah.
And so finally we slowed it right down where the next time she came in, she's like, "Oh my gosh, this is making all the difference. Like now my hip muscles have, like the glute muscles were doing the work, and it was making such a difference in just her everyday less pain and also in walking, horseback
All
riding."
of it. I think the advantage of movement therapists, if I can kind of call yoga instructors, is that a practice like yoga helps increase body awareness. And when women and men learn to recognize they have tension, let's say in their pelvic floor, for them, that's life changing because it's not until you connect with your body and you become aware of where you're holding your tension that you go, "Oh my goodness, I walk around all day with a tight pelvic floor."
Yeah.
And then we can change their patterns of movement through the day. But it takes a bit of time to do that. And so I think yoga is really important for that because it's one of those movement therapies that really gets you to connect with your body. And we don't connect with our body very much. We disconnect, if anything. And so getting people to recognize, okay, can you feel that there's tension in this area? And a lot of women and men, will start with very global. I'll say, okay, can you feel that your bum is tightening up? Can you soften your bum? Can you widen your sit bones? Can you soften your breath? Can you soften your jaw? Can you soften your shoulders? And then they'll feel that letting go. And that letting go, I'll often say, so that's the tension in your pelvic floor. And then they get really good at connecting. And then they go, "Oh my goodness, when I sit in a meeting, I find myself," and then we give them strategies. We're like, "Okay, so when you're sitting in a meeting, I want you to widen your sit bones, sit wide in your chair, soften your belly, take some deep breaths," right? Because then they really understand the power of breathing and letting go of tension in their body and their pelvic floor. And then we teach them those strategies in the day so they don't have back pain and hip pain through the day. They're walking around with too much tension. And we have to help them reduce that tension. And this idea that we have to walk around sucking in our bellies all day is ridiculous because it just fuels, we're not designed to suck in our belly button all day. And that fuels more tension. But as women, especially because of posture and vanity, suck in your belly. I still find that a challenge. I still have lots of my patients coming in where I have to very gently kind of nudge that belief that we have to suck in our bellies. And it's hard, right? Because people have been told things for so many years. To change that is not always easy. But in yoga, that's great because it's all about let go, soften, right?
Right.
You can be strong in a pose, but not stiff and tight. There's a difference between strength and stiffness. Stiffness is not our friend, right? So you can be strong, but not be tight. And that comes, I think, via the breath and whatnot. So yeah, it's fascinating. And when people start to experience it, then they get it. And then they start to use those strategies during the day a little bit more.
Yeah. Oh, this is so amazing to hear. And for anyone who's working with people who, there was a while, let me just share this. There was a while where I was thinking, do I want to become a pelvic floor physio?
Yeah.
I'm so focused on pelvic health. And then I was like, no, my favorite thing to do is just this building that awareness, holding space for that person for a whole hour where they're just noticing I'm suggesting different movements and different breaths, and they're really doing the learning about their own body in that space. And it's such a nice dance to have in our physio office, where the physio is like, okay, here's how your body's working. And they have insight. And then they come to me, and then they might go to a massage therapist in our office as well. Like, okay, let's try and reduce this tension a little bit more, getting to that in a different way. So
yeah. And it's important, like I said, that we work as a team, but we use the same language as well, right? Because the words we use and the language we use is so important. And I think it gets very confusing to our patients and our clients when they hear different things that are very contradictory between therapists. So the more we talk about this, the more that we talk about how the body works and using certain words in the language, then we're speaking the same to all of our patients, and we're creating a lot less confusion. And I think, especially with pelvic health, the world of pelvic health and yoga, works really well together because we can speak the same language. But we need to educate each other on that, right? And demystifying some of the myths around, in our case, we're talking about the pelvic floor, but there's myths around low back pain. There's myths around a whole lot of things, right?
Right.
So that we all reinforce the same concepts and say, I know you're sore today. I know your back is sore, but you're okay. You're safe. It's okay to move. It's okay to exercise, and again, we encourage people for mobility because we have so much disability when it comes to even just low back pain and hip problems, not just pelvic floor issues, but low back pain and hip problems. And we need to encourage people to move and feel confident that they can move safely and comfortably. And so working together is really key for that to work well.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything that you feel like, oh, I wish yoga teachers knew this about the pelvic floor, or here's a myth and I'd love for just the general population to know that? Is there anything that really comes to mind?
There's so many things. So I think the main thing that I want anybody listening to understand is that there can be two states to any muscle in the body. We can have muscles that are weak, but I think this whole concept of weak and tight is really important. And it's okay if you don't really know, if the person in front of you has either a weak pelvic floor or tight pelvic floor. I think it's also important for your listeners to be comfortable asking questions. Again, ask permission to ask questions. Maybe you do this one-on-one when you're first meeting your client before they start to join a class. And you can say something to the effect of, okay, well, tell me your story. Tell me what are your issues? What are your goals? And what would you like to achieve in our yoga practice? Because when you ask questions and people can open up to you, then you're going to hear little things that they're telling you that might make it easier than to bring up a conversation. So if a patient says, I've got back pain, I've got hip pain, and you can maybe open up the door and say, are you having any bladder and bowel issues? And then maybe your client opens up about that. So that's going to help you, again, gain a little bit more understanding of where you want to go with their yoga practice, and might highlight to you, okay, maybe there's weakness, maybe there's tension. Then that opens the door to talk about the pelvic floor. And then opens the door about, there are people that are trained to have a look at these muscles. And it's really important to do that so that we know, maybe you have some weakness, maybe you have some tension. And I can't necessarily tell that because I'm not doing an exam on you, but there are physios and nurse practitioners out there who do this type of exam. Is that something that is of interest to you? And I think that's a really nice way to kind of, again, open the door to conversation. Mm-hmm. Myths, we could probably do a whole show on myths because there's so many myths. Like I said, the myth that your bladder is small. Right. So this idea that you will never be able to hold it in and go to the bathroom every 3 hours because that's the norm. No, I go to the bathroom every half an hour. And sometimes they get told, I was told that my bladder is small. And that goes back to language that we use. And unfortunately, in the medical world, we're not always great with using good language. And then we have to often be careful as the physios to not contradict what somebody else in the medical field has said, but to say, well, you know what, your bladder is a balloon. It has the capacity to accommodate more urine, and we can actually work on increasing the time between going to the bathroom so that you don't go to the bathroom every half an hour. So there's myths around that. There's myths around how much water people should be drinking, right? Everybody thinks I need to drink 8 glasses of water, but it depends, right? We're not all the same. So there's myths around things like, well, I don't drink any water because I don't want to have any incontinence. but sometimes that can make you more incontinent. And then there's myths around, a lot of athletes will drink too much water. Sometimes they're way overhydrating. So there's a lot of myths around fluids. And so I always tell people, you got to look in the toilet. If you are not sure if you're drinking not enough or you're drinking too much, if you have a pee and you look in the toilet and there's a light yellow tinge to your urine, you're good. If it's white all the time, maybe you're drinking too much. If it's dark and stinky and really a dark color, then you're not drinking enough fluids, right? So we keep it simple. There's myths around sexuality. I mean, that's a whole other thing. Like if I think of my postmenopausal women who never got taught about hormonal changes in their body, they don't understand where the dryness is coming from. Nobody talks about lubrication. Nobody talks about all these wonderful products that are on the market to help women have better lubrication of their vaginal tissues to make sure they can have good sexual function. We don't even talk about that. So women often assume that it's normal at a certain age to have some discomfort with intercourse, right? So there's myths around that. And the main thing there is that nothing should hurt down there.
Right.
Things that go inside our body should not be causing us pain, right? Pleasurable activities like intercourse should never cause pain. And if they do, let's have a look at that and see where that's coming from. And sometimes it's just doing education on how to take good care of the skin, and educating women on products that are available for lubrication and talking about hormones and what that does. So there's a lot of myths around that. So, I mean, there's so many myths. So I would encourage your yoga instructors to, you can seek out courses where, there's courses that are geared for if you don't want to do an internal exam, but you want to learn about the pelvic floor, there are courses available for anybody to take to learn about the pelvic floor so that at least then in your practice the words you should be using, the language you should be using, you understand the myths, and you can demystify those myths. And there's a non-internal course that's offered with Pelvic Health Solutions that we do have a lot of massage therapists who take it and midwives. And I think we've had yoga instructors who've done that one just because they want to know more about it themselves to be able to speak about it. And there's lots of stuff online, that I'm sure is out there that people can take as well. So I think the more you learn, the more you understand, the better it will be in your practice to help your clients know when to seek out a professional for a more full evaluation. Right. And yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for that, getting into a few of the major myths. And you're right, there are so many topics that we can go along.
Yeah, and if we talk about pelvic pain, that's a whole other, myths about pain, myths about all of that. I mean, that's a lot. There's a lot of myths around it too, right? So,
Well, this is a great introduction and diving in a little bit deeper to the pelvic floor. So thank you so much for your time today doing this.
You're welcome.
If people want to get in touch with you further or order one of these, what is the best website for them to go to? And we will link to it in the show notes.
So my website for ordering the models is called Total Pelvic Health. And totalpelvichealth.ca. So that's to kind of order. And then my email, when you go on my website, my email's on there as well. I'm on Twitter at Gateway PT. I'm on Facebook, MJ Forget. So you can connect via social media. But email, like I said, it's MJ at Total Pelvic Health. And the website is totalpelvichealth.ca. And so that's how people can reach me.
All right. Thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome. It was great. Thank you.
Before I sign off, Connected Yoga Teachers, I want to share one more thing. I stayed on the phone with MJ a little bit longer, and I had another question in terms of what to call the pelvic floor if it is holding tension or if it is weak. And here is her answer to that.
I think it depends on who we're speaking to. I mean, amongst professionals, certainly, nobody can actually, at this moment, nobody really agrees on what's the best term to use medically to talk about tension in the pelvic floor. So we'll hear a lot of overactivity of the pelvic floor and underactivity of the pelvic floor. So amongst professionals, we'll definitely talk that way. To my patients, those words are just, it's too complex and it's actually a little threatening, right? So tension is more, I think it's like a softer term to use. It's a less threatening word to use with our clients. And they get that, right? They understand tension. And so, but overactivity and all those words with our clients, it's too much, and so that's why I tend to use the word tension with my clients more. But amongst professionals, like I said, we do use certain terminology, though nobody can really agree on what's the best word. I mean, that's just the way it's going to be. Yeah. But I think with your clients in the classroom, it works because you're probably using those words. Let's see if we can soften the tension and soften the tension in your jaw and soften the tension around your eyes, soften the tension between your sit bones, soften the tension in your belly. That people get, that people understand, and that's not a threatening word to use.
Okay, thank you so much for that.
You're welcome.
Okay, connected yoga teachers, I want to hear from you. What is your key takeaway? What did you learn about today? What are you thinking that you are going to introduce to your yoga students or maybe introduce into your yoga teacher trainings because of this episode? Please share with me in our Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group or in the show notes. I love to read the comments in the show notes, and I try to comment back for each and every one when I can. One big key takeaway for me was this idea that MJ shared about the pelvic floor and the wording around the pelvic floor holding too much tension. I feel like this has been such a gift, and I have used this over and over again when talking about the pelvic floor, which I do a lot of in my one-on-one sessions with yoga students. And as I said, I am so excited that MJ is coming back to talk to the Pelvic Health Professionals group. So if you're wondering what this is about, it's a membership site. You can pay monthly or annually and basically dive in, learn about pelvic health, and take in as much as you need. We have monthly Q&A calls. We have guest experts like MJ coming in to talk to us each and every month. We have a Facebook group, and then we have a library of resources that is building and building. My Yoga for Pelvic Health 8-hour course is now inside that membership site, and it really makes sense. It makes more sense to pay for the membership and get all of the extra bonuses than it does to pay for the course on its own. So to find out more, go to theconnectedyogateacher.com and look under trainings and events, or visit pelvichealthprofessionals.com. And you can see all of the information there. And again, as I said, if you're listening in real time, the doors are now open to that and they will close. So the reason why I open and close this is that I have realized that launching and promoting and talking about an offering takes a lot of my energy. And instead, I want to close the doors and then be in there with our group of pelvic health professionals and provide the information that they are asking for and be focused on that and not be trying to promote and sell at the same time. I really love to dive in and create the content in there. Not to worry either. I will be talking more about what it's like to run a membership site as I figure it out, because I know a lot of you have asked me, how can I do something like this? How can I put my courses online or my classes online and run it as a membership site? So I'm in the trenches right now, friends. I am learning as I go, and I will share with you as I learn more. Thank you so much to our amazing team, Samantha, Suzanne, Crunch, and Cindy, for getting this episode out to our listeners today. You make this magic happen, and also for doing so many other things behind the scenes. I really owe so many thanks to all of you. Also, you, dear listener, this podcast would not exist if it wasn't for you taking the time to tune in and listen. And I am so grateful for you being here today and also for the work that you're doing out into the world. And I want to know what you will be doing this week to stay connected. Maybe you are feeling like you need to connect more to yourself, more to your yoga practice, more to your community, or something else. But let me know what that is that you are doing to stay connected so that you can share the yoga that lights you up.